We have merchandise for sale. Go to our website, moviesthatmatterpodcast.com, click on the link to our store, and you can see the amazing t-shirts, stickers, and posters we have for sale. Our excellent friend Amy Patnovic made the design, and we coded all of our social issues from our past episodes with all of the movies we've discussed. But there's a secret to the design. Each image represents a movie, and you have to guess which one it is. We think it's going to be a really fun puzzle design for you to solve, and we hope you'll order lots of t-shirts and share it with your friends. Welcome to Movies That Matter, the podcast about recent films going above and beyond the call of box office returns to boldly explore a social issue affecting people's lives. I'm Nicole Finari, and unfortunately Stacy can't be with us today, but we do have...
Garrett Everhart.
Welcome back, Garrett. What movie are we going to overanalyze this week?
We are overanalyzing Annihilation.
When biologist Lena's husband returns from an environmental disaster area with a mysterious and life-threatening disease, she enters the zone with a military detail to gather information, but what she finds will challenge every natural law she knows to be true. All right, what did you think?
I really liked it. It was very dense, to use a Turner phrase, to put the sci in sci-fi. It was very scientific. That got really deep into how cellular biology works. But I really liked it. It's really a thinker. It made a lot of people continue to think after the movie, like, what did I just watch? So those are the type of movies I enjoy.
Okay. I want to see if you can guess if I liked it or not. What would be your guess?
I'm leaning no.
Okay.
That you didn't like it.
Because?
The story was just a lot. And it was, I guess, not entirely clear at times where it was going. Like, particularly once you got out of that crazy third act ending. And so I think, like, just the story outweighs some of the positives with, like, how they handled the female characters and stuff like that. Okay.
So I was thinking about this movie. It is evenly but not hurriedly paced, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we all know how easily I get bored at everything.
Mm-hmm.
So I figured I would surprise all of our listeners and be like, I actually really liked this movie.
Nice.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I'm like, why this one and not another one? I think we can sort of explore a little bit. I'm not 100% sure on my case, like why,
Mm-hmm.
but I thought it was atmospheric and creepy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I was prepared to sleep with the lights on last night. There's one very violent scene in the movie, but this I actually don't want to spoil in case people see it. Like, the violence is also has a really high creep factor too, so you get the double whammy.
Mm-hmm.
Of the creepiness and the violence, and I was like, oh my god, I'm never gonna get that image out of my head. So
to talk about a little bit, I think what you were referring to without spoiling it. So the bear in this movie was definitely worse than the Revenant bear.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, ugh. Actually, yeah, it was. Oh. I don't even I just can't even relive that scene. I saw the movie really late last night, and so it was a Saturday, and I was like, I just want Saturday Night Live to still be on so I can comedy myself before I have to go to bed. Yeah, it was bad. So a couple things. So it does seem to be a bit polarizing on critics, although I know you hate the Rotten Tomato review. I know you hate it, but it is somewhat of a good indication of where people stand with it.
Okay, that's fair. It's, in the 80s?
Yeah.
I think I last saw 80, 81, something like that. It's gotten pretty good reviews, and a lot of people have really enjoyed it, and I know a lot of the critics that I follow and listen to are really encouraging people to go see it in the theaters, because of some of the stuff that's happening, happened on the periphery of the release of the movie, which we'll probably talk about in depth a little later.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's gotten good critical reviews, but it's not performing well in the box office. I just saw today that it fell 49% and made about 5.5-6 million this weekend for a 20 million total, and so the number of theaters it's in is going to be going down, so it's not going to perform very well box office wise.
Okay. So let's sort of give our put our critic hats on. There's something about Alex Garland where when I saw Ex Machina, like I came out of that thinking like, was this a play that they filmed? Because it takes place in a single location and has very few actors. Mm-hmm. And that's almost always the hallmark of like theater to screen, right? Mm-hmm. Because theater has to usually be that way.
Right, exactly.
For obvious reasons. But then when I was watching Annihilation, I was like, I have that same feeling. It still feels like a play to me. Mm. And I was like, even though you're out in the world and you see all these things, but it's like on camera at any given time, there's only a couple of people talking or interacting. It still has a very intimate quality.
Mm-hmm. I see what you mean in terms of that, in terms of Ex Machina. That's a very astute observation I hadn't heard before. And yeah, it is like in a really centralized locale with just a handful of actors, but I didn't get that sense here. I think it's because there were more varied locations, more than Ex Machina at least, and there were more actors, and probably because of the density of the subject matter.
But there weren't a lot more actors if you think about it. So you sort of have her crowd behind when she's sort of relating what happened when she went into the Shimmer. But like basically it's her and one person talking.
True. Yeah.
And when the women go in, there are a few scenes where they're all talking fine. But again, that's like for a play cast, that's about the number, it just...
Then you have Oscar Isaac as well and the coworker professor that she had the affair with.
Yeah.
So it was a little more, but...
Still manageable for like a play cast. I don't know. There's just a quality to the way he films it where it's like you're changing sets.
So are you saying this is a bad thing or a good thing? Because a lot of people would like the intimacy.
I think it's a good thing. I think that's part of why I really enjoyed the movie. Like, I think what it allows you to do is, like I said, it was very evenly paced. Like, it doesn't ratchet anything up ever. Really. Like, it just keeps slow and steady, and it sort of lets things unfold before your eyes and draws me in that way, because I'm not feeling like, frenetic stuff, which can be a turnoff, but it also just lets the actors sort of breathe into the space, I think.
Yeah, it kept me steadily engrossed as well, so I agree. Like, as you slowly see things unfold and like some of the visual cues and Easter eggs that Garland put in there. So like, they're explaining how cells work and how cells aren't, how they're perfect, but within humans, there's a flaw that allows our cells to degenerate, and that's how we end up dying. And she made a remark about how, maybe one day it won't be like this and you could live on forever looking the same way. And that's sort of what happened in the Shimmer, is that they got rid of those faults in our cells. And so you saw that with Kane when he left and he wasn't the same. You saw that at the ending with Jane as well. And they were little visual cues that let you know what was going on as far as the melding of the different life forms within the Shimmer. So like you had that tattoo that showed up on Anya's forearm, which is Gina Rodriguez's character. And then it cut to the interrogation with Natalie Portman and Benedict Wong. And now the tattoo is on her forearm. So like you're starting to piece together like, oh, I see what the Shimmer is doing to these life forms. So I thought that was very well done.
Yeah, I mean, I just thought, so a lot of the criticism I heard was like, oh, the people were like, the characters were really thin. And you were like, yeah, but that wasn't what this was about. The people were just there to draw the viewer into the world.
Yeah.
So like, I'm like, this wasn't a character-driven movie. That wasn't the point. So, and apparently in the book, they didn't even have names.
No, yeah. That's, and there was a point of controversy like the week that this came out about whitewashing. So I guess Natalie Portman's...
we should call that out.
Yeah, Natalie Portman's character was described as being half Asian, but that was in the second book, which was
interesting.
Published after this went into production. So, Alex Garland, if he was only using the first book as reference, the characters didn't have names, like you said, and they also weren't really described. So it was sort of open slate, and then the descriptions came in the second book after this movie was already in production. So, I mean, for me, that was a bit of a mitigating factor, but a lot of people took the movie to task for that.
Yeah, I feel like... I don't know. Yeah. I mean, I saw that. And again, I was like, well, it wasn't until the second book. Yes, he did have a white woman at the center of the movie. But like, there was still diversity in the cast.
A lot of diversity.
I mean, whether you consider Oscar Isaac's Latino or not, like he's half Guatemalan, like
right.
So I was just sort of like, yeah, I actually will give him a like we didn't know like kind of thing on that one. So another critic, I've called out the score in the movie, which I actually really liked.
Yeah, it was very minimalistic, and it like built to that big like roaring crescendo at the end in that crazy third act. I liked it, and it was a little more electronic based.
Well, so that was the thing. It wasn't though. Like there was a counterpoint. Anytime they're referring to her past or her time before the Shimmer, it's a lone sort of acoustic guitar, and then in the Shimmer it gets both multi-layered and electronic,
okay.
Which I thought. The strong contrast of how this soundscape is before with a, like, again, single acoustic instrument, and then you get this sort of digital complexity. I thought that was done. I guess everybody likes the, like, yeah. we're gonna make, like, a supercut of everybody singing soundtracks one of these days on this podcast.
No, but I agree. Yeah, that's a good way of pointing out the subtle differences. That's a good point.
Yeah, and I will call out the fact that we all know how much I hate CGI, and some of it was a bit fakety-fake in this movie, but it sort of fit the tone. That scene where she's with that humanoid figure who's about to shadow her was clearly like a person in a suit. And I was like, thank you for not CGIing a person, because it just looks so much better when you're interacting.
Yeah, that's a good point. The CGI really didn't take me out of it, but I don't know if it was just because I was like really trying to wrap my head around what the heck I was watching that I didn't notice some of the CGI stuff. Where like, a typical superhero film is not as dense, so you're not paying as much attention to the plot and the story to see where it's going, to where you notice things like the CGI. And I think I was just so like focused on trying to catch the subtleties in the plot to where I maybe overlooked some of the CGI. It wasn't as important to me, I guess. I really didn't notice it.
I mean, yeah, I guess I felt like you sort of knew that they were going to create a CGI world kind of going into it. So I wasn't looking for there to be a ton of practical effects. And, if it wasn't hyper realistic, like, but just, I don't know. It's when they don't blend it well. And this wasn't meant to be blended. The whole thing was meant to be CGI. So that was fine. What did we make of the, like, central theme, or what was this movie about?
Yeah, I was going to ask you that same question, actually. You read my mind. So Alex Garland said that the theme was self-destruction.
Right. I mean, the movie is called Annihilation.
Yeah. And the way that we destroy ourselves. So, you had Anya. She was an alcoholic. You had Tessa Thompson's physicist character, where she was a cutter. She cut herself. And was depressed. And then you had Dr. Ventress, who was dying of cancer. So this was a literal suicide mission for her. She went into the Shimmer to die rather than waiting on the outside, just rotting from cancer. And so I could see that those themes and how they were built upon here with looking through some of the characters. So, that's the only thing that I really caught, other than like the deep scientific narratives that were put into the film.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, I thought, which again, like the characters were really thin, but the point of her having, again, her cheating on her husband wasn't that we were supposed to really understand like the intricacies of their marital problems. That wasn't what this movie was about. It was about the fact that she had entered this sort of self-destructive phase where she starts destroying her marriage. I found the movie interesting, but I will say that there is somewhat of a flaw at the center, that I didn't feel like that theme tied particularly well with the sci-fi. How do I put this? The Shimmer didn't seem to match up as like self-destructive.
Self-destruction was in the characters. The Shimmer wasn't. Was it destroying things by melding everything together in order to expand and save itself? But that was just destroying other things. It wasn't destroying itself. It was helping itself. So the Shimmer, there wasn't a really direct corollary that I could see with self-destruction with the Shimmer itself. You're right. So I think for me, the Shimmer,
when Lena, the character, says something along the lines of it's not destroying everything, it's creating something new.
Right.
And so you can sort of get into the very sort of Hindu philosophy of like creation and destruction are the same thing, right?
Yeah.
Where, you know, it is making something new. But I think, yeah, it's hard to see the sort of self-destruction and the annihilation and the negatives of it when, yeah, some of the things it creates are absolutely horrifying.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you know, I guess an alligator with shark teeth.
Yeah.
But most of what you see is of a thing of incredible beauty.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the landscape was very floral and had a lot of color.
Yeah.
Even though we later find out what some of those floral structures are, what they were before they became floral structures. But yeah, there is like an element of beauty in a lot of the works inside the Shimmer, even though we know that they come from a difficult place of melding different living things.
So, shall we tackle the ending?
I do want to ask you something first. What do you think of Garland's handling of the female characters? I thought it was very well done. And in his 2 feature films, he's had, to me, just speaking as a man, which isn't saying much, a good female representation. So Ex Machina, in the way that it explored some of the exploitation and the way that men view women through the android that he created. And the android having some self-sufficiency and things of that nature, and how that tied into feminism and things of that nature. And then here with Annihilation, how they had a whole female team, but it wasn't really harped on, and they were strong women, and they had their own motivations and things of that nature. I thought it was well done. He's developing a good track record with handling female characters. What did you think?
I thought it was good. I also I've read this article, which I guess I hadn't really noticed this, but it was well on point that somehow sci-fi movies are really going in a female-led directions.
Yeah.
So you have, Ex Machina, Arrival, ScarJo's done a few, Lucy, Her, Ghost in the Shell, however you feel about that. Gravity, yep. There's they kind of killed the male character off real quick, right. And then it's just her. So yeah, there was a long list in this article, and they were sort of talking about sort of Genesis, maybe Hunger Games, having female centered there, and sort of why that is and what happens. And I actually think the handling of the women in this movie was very much. Honestly, they give you the flimsiest excuse ever as to why it's all women. Oh, so first they're she kind of looks up at them and she's like, oh, it's all women. And they're like, well, we're scientists, which is neither here nor there is an explanation, which I actually appreciated. It was sort of well, it just happened that way. Yeah. It wasn't deliberate. There was no design to make this all women. They were just the women. They were just the people that were chosen. And I actually thought that was great because it was no one questions when it's all men going into things. Right. And so then you're just or you get some sort of oh, but these are the people most qualified for the job, you know? It's well, just because it is. And it's great, don't over-explain it. Mm-hmm. Don't make it women are special or necessary to do this mission. And then to that end, there's absolutely no exploitation of them as sexual objects. Mm-hmm. I mean, yes, you do see her having sex at one point, but I didn't feel it wasn't gratuitous. Yeah. And she's pretty clothed the rest of the time. And there was no need for them to either be hyper capable to prove that they're not just any woman, really these are super exceptional, which often happens when you have female in action movies. They often have to they're so super over the top qualified to be there. There was none of that. So I would say the handling was pretty good. I liked all of the actresses. Again, they weren't given a lot to work with. Right. I thought Gina Rodriguez did a great job and hope to see her in more things. Yeah. I was very excited to see her get a shot at being on film. And branching out from Jane the Virgin. And she went in a complete 180 from Jane the Virgin, which is more comedic, and she's playing a young woman. Exactly. Here she was a very strong-willed Army veteran, more macho
I guess you would say. And she did a very good job. So I'm happy for this opportunity for her.
Yeah. I mean, macho, but again, like, not trying to, like, out male the men. Like, she was just macho in a way that seemed authentic to that character. So I give everyone credit for not it being like, we're women and we're going to do this thing that the men couldn't do. Like, that wasn't what this was about. So, yeah, I feel like it's so funny because I can see, I read, like, a totally negative review of this movie, and everything they said they didn't like was the stuff that I like. So hopefully we've given you enough information to, like, decide if you want to see it yourself. Like, this is either your kind of movie or it isn't in that way. Like, it really is my kind of movie. Like, I'm all about a sort of intellectual puzzle. And
yeah, but I mean, that's the crux of all the behind the scenes drama with its release, right?
So let's get into that.
Yeah. So it was bought by Paramount Pictures after the success of Ex Machina. And then it underwent a test screening with some audiences just to see what they thought of the movie as they completed it and went into post-production. And based on the negative reaction they got in the test screenings, one of the producers of the movie, Dave Ellison, he wanted to change it because he thought it was too complex, too intelligent. So he wanted to make Natalie Portman's character more sympathetic and tinker with the ending. And so the other producer, Scott Rudin, who's worked with Alex Garland for a while, he really fought not to have the ending changed. And I think Alex Garland had final cut, so he was able to use that power to ensure that the movie that we saw was what he wanted. And so they compromised because they didn't think it would do well with audiences, and released it in theaters in US, Canada, and China, and then everywhere else in the world would get it on Netflix like 3 weeks later. And so that was the whole background with the controversy with Annihilation and its rollout.
This brings up like
it's like the whole argument with mid-budget movies and like how they're not getting made. Like Annihilation cost $55 million, and as the industry trends more towards cinematic universes and big blockbusters, is a question of what's going to happen to these types of movies, where like it's a little more intellectual, and it falls outside the purview of what like the average moviegoer wants to see. And it's getting harder and harder to put those types of movies out. Like, we're in the middle of a real sci-fi renaissance with movies like Gravity, Annihilation, Ex Machina, Blade Runner 2049, where they're putting out good content, but they're not doing well in theaters. Like,
sorry. Speaking of Blade Runner 2049, yes, the whole Alien series always had a woman in its center. Yeah, so like, okay, I feel like people like me always, who, while an economist, is certainly not an expert on Hollywood economics, is always like, just make a whole bunch of like mid-budget, adult films, and then if one of them hits, then you just make a ton of money. And so if only 1 out of 5 of them is going to hit, like, just make the equivalent amount to like one blockbuster, expense-wise. Because then, you have what? Get Out. Arrival actually did pretty well.
Gravity did well.
Gravity did well. Girls Trip did well last year, to like everyone's shock. Right. Because, oh my gosh, people are funny. People, definitely people hate funny. And so they're always, I feel like this tension has been happening. Like, my Big Fat Greek Wedding, everybody was like, oh, the surprise hit, and everybody tried to replicate that model. Like, I do you think it's actually getting worse?
I do. And what's complicating things are, so you mentioned some of the successes, but, you have something like Blade Runner, which was this type of movie, but they gave it a big blockbuster budget.
Right, which they shouldn't have done.
Blockbuster advertising, and it flopped. Annihilation isn't doing as well as it could. And what's complicating it is streaming. So now they have this avenue to where, if we don't want to put these movies out in theaters and risk it there, we can just throw it on Netflix and it can come out, the same day. This is what happened with Cloverfield Paradox, even though that ended up not being a
That's
very
another
good
one
movie.
that was woman-led.
Yeah. And so, I think there needs to be room in the theaters for these types of movies to be seen. Like, we can't just have 40 comic book movies in theaters, and like that's the only way you can have a theatrical experience. I mean, because some of these movies like Annihilation deserves to be seen with a big sound system and on a big screen rather than seeing it on the couch on a 50-inch screen. Like, you know, there needs to be space for these types of movies, and it's getting less and less likely that that's going to happen as, you know, theaters are struggling.
Yeah, so I mean, I feel like there is that built-in infrastructure, though. I mean, movies theaters have multiple screens. Most of them, they're already built, but they can't actually just show Black Panther on every single screen. Like, they have to have some things to put on screens. Mm-hmm. So, to me, like that structure isn't going away. So there will still be some demand for it, but the supply could dry up because you'd be like, well, I'm just going to put this on TV and have, you know, Netflix and Amazon and all the other things take care of it, which is basically what they did with Annihilation, right? Like, they let Netflix have the international rights. So, I don't know. I
was going to say, and this is also like a cautionary tale about listening to test screenings. So, like, you know, those aren't always indicative of like what a movie can do. So, you know, just of some famous stories, Seven, it almost didn't have that legendary ending it had because they test screened it for some audiences, and the audiences wanted a happier ending, but Brad Pitt had it in his contract. He had a lot of leverage, so they kept that famous ending. Once Upon a Time in America, it was released only 2 hours in theaters instead of 4 because they had a test screening in Boston during a blizzard where people were waiting out in line, and then they had to come and watch a 4-hour movie. Of course, they weren't going to give it good reviews in the test screenings. So, you know, that sort of thing. Following test screenings isn't always the best course of action. Little Mermaid almost had a couple of songs scratched from its theatrical release because kids were fidgety and weren't paying attention. And one of those songs that almost got cut was Part of Your World. Yeah. Because of the test screening and how kids were behaving. So, like, it's also a cautionary tale about putting too much stock into those as well.
Well,
another test screening story that was interesting, Gravity. It got negative test screening reviews because the audience members asked, where were the aliens? And so WB almost made them change it. But the director, Alfonso Cuarón, he used all his power and said, no, we're going to put it out the way it is. And, you know, of course, it got all those Oscar nominations. But, you know.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's what, you know, everyone's been predicting the demise of adult movies for a long time. And I do think I do think, though, we're in a bubble of the what is it called? The universe, the cinematic universe, the multi-movie cinematic universe. Okay. Because, first of all, Disney owns so many of those properties now.
Right.
They've just been gobbling them up. They're clearly trying to get X-Men. Mm-hmm. Because I don't think they want Fox, right? Like, I almost do they even care? Mm-hmm. So, I mean, they are making money now, but I didn't, you know, like, Westerns were huge and then those went away. Like, horror movies were huge and then those went away and then came back and then went away again. You know what I mean? Like, bubbles burst on people's tastes all the time. Like, I actually don't think there is an unending appetite for superhero movies.
Oh, definitely not. It's interesting you said Westerns because that's what Steven Spielberg compared them to. He said, this is just an age in the new Western and those went away, these will too. And I always have these arguments with people that, you know, the superhero movie bubble is going to burst and people are like, oh, no. I'm like, no, it's.
I mean, like, everybody always thinks it's going to it's safe as houses, right, Garrett? Right. Safe as houses. And, you know, the market doesn't always keep going up, guys. Like, that's not how it works.
Yeah.
So I think people have been predicting the demise of, like, adult movie fare for a long time. But I also think, first of all, there's just so many people who want to make these movies. Mm-hmm. And you have to start somewhere. Like, you can't just give... Like, it's a pipeline issue as well. Like, I can't give you Black Panther to direct until you made Fruitvale Station. And then I'm like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
Huh, you made Fruitvale Station. They're pretty good. Like, here, have a bigger property. Sure. Like, have Creed. Mm-hmm. And now I know you can handle Black Panther. Like, you can't just pluck somebody out of their, like, short film they made at NYU and then be like, here's a, like, superhero movie.
Here's a $250 million budget.
Like, like, so... Some of it is like you have to be grooming people up the chain, and then there has to be a pipeline to do that.
Yeah, I think that's true that they won't disappear forever. Like, you'll always have your avenues to put them out. it's just a question of should these only be relegated to streaming rather than theater? That's going to be the question. And you brought up the Disney potential purchase of Fox, and this just goes to show how myopic people are because they're excited they get to see Wolverine interact with the Avengers, and it's like, well, what happens to Fox Searchlight? They put out the two movies that are probably going to win the Best Picture tonight, Shape of Water and Three Billboards. So, though that's a part of Fox too, what happens to that? And, people don't think about those things as they just look to big blockbuster movies. And, I think that's indicative of the problem in the film industry right now.
Right. And I think, I think your whole point about, test marketing and all of this stuff, like, I think there is, so I always think of the music industry because I think in some ways what happened in the music industry is replicable to the movie industry and not at all. Because in the music industry, if I want to put out a CD, like, hey, I have a mic, right?
Right, exactly.
Like I can sit here and play an instrument and sing and make an album and put it out there for the world to see. And you just can't scale a movie down in production. I mean, Primer being the best example and still. Like, watching the credits of that movie is like a bizarre experience where you're like, oh, it's just the same three people cycling over and over and over and over again, right? So you do have to have some sort of infrastructure, some sort of investment to put out movies. But the assumption that, like, people are dumb and there aren't enough people to watch something intelligent or good, people always make that assumption. People have, the music industry has, Disney again. Right? Like, look at all the music Disney manufactures. And yet people still want to hear different kinds of music and different things. Yes, a lot of that Disney stuff makes a ton of money and it reliably will, but you can't perfectly predict. Yeah. And then, what was it? Gnarls Barkley comes along and everybody is like, no. This crazy has no genre. Right. That we can comfortably fit it into. It doesn't sound like anything else. We can't market it any kind of way. And you're like, I see how you put so much intellectual property behind thinking about this piece of music. Take a step back. This song's awesome. like under any metric, you're like, but the song's just awesome. Right, how could you think it would not do well? It's like, take off all of the like learning and just like listen with your heart or your soul or whatever you want to call it, and be like, but it's just an awesome song. Like,
okay, so going forward with this music industry analogy, so you're right. Even though music has in many ways become more manufactured and commercial, there's still avenues for some of the more quote unquote intellectual stuff to get out there. But do you feel that even though
innovative. It doesn't necessarily have to be intellectual. I don't want to put that on people. Like, innovative.
Yeah, innovative and more experimental music is probably a better turn of phrase. Even though that stuff still has avenues, do you feel that there's an issue with the accessibility to that stuff? So, like, it's out there, but it's harder for people to find since it's not on the radio or TV, and that's where the average person who really isn't a music head and isn't very deep into it, that's where they find their stuff. So yeah, that stuff still has avenues, but are the avenues closed off to the average person and they can't find it? And will that happen in movies if we keep with this music industry analogy?
Well, so that's what's so fascinating about what happened with the music industry. Everyone's like, it's totally new. Everything's going to be different. Barriers are breaking down. I will post this article too because it's really, really interesting. Except you give people, it's like the tyranny of choice. It's like, okay, here's Spotify, here's everything you could possibly listen to, and people get confused. Right. And then Spotify has to hire somebody to curate all those Spotify lists. So he basically recreated the radio DJ. You know what I mean? So everyone's like, oh no, totally new model. And I'm like, is it? Like, it was for a little while, and they realized this doesn't work. Somebody needs to. Human curation is a function.
You need a tastemaker.
Yeah,
These industries need tastemakers.
So you sort of, now it's on a much smaller scale. I mean, a lot of people lost their jobs. But yeah, you've sort of seen it like circle back, which is why, again, I'm always like, oh, it's the death of the mid-level movie. And I'm like, people have been predicting that demise for a long time, but enough of them still kind of win the lottery and people see them, that people are still and maybe not as much, but people are still willing to invest in these projects. I do think the Netflix thing is worrisome.
Mm-hmm.
And I do wonder with all of these reclining seat theaters how many people are awake watching these movies. Because I'm like, did you just pay $13 to go sleep outside your house? I hope not. I hope you actually watch the movie. Right. So, I mean, I don't know how many people are like you and me, but I still think there's a lot of us. And we're a reliable market.
Okay. This conversation made me feel better. I was very pessimistic about this issue, but you've convinced me. Good. More so.
Good. I mean, I'm not so willing to say like things that have stood the test of time this long through, television was going to be the divisive movie when it first got invented, and it wasn't. So I'm like, no, good movies will survive. I hope they do survive in theaters. I think that is going to become a factor, but I think at some point Netflix and Amazon are going to do the dual model. Amazon's already doing it.
Yeah. They put their movies out in theaters first, and Netflix doesn't. Yeah.
I think Netflix will probably change. Mm-hmm. They're pretty open to like testing out new things. Mm-hmm. So interesting. I sometimes the social issue is going to be apparent when you start one of these podcasts, and sometimes it's not. But I'm actually glad we had this discussion. And I will post links to things, and everybody keep going to the movies. Actually, I will say this: there are a couple of sort of hidden editorial policies that Movies That Matter has, which people have asked me about in person, but no one, like, I don't know that we've ever put it out there. Obviously, we only review movies that are playing in theaters. That is intentional. Not surprisingly, I feel a little bit more hardcore about this than Stacey does. But let's face it, I'm probably a little bit more hardcore about everything than Stacey is. And it's because I absolutely despise when somebody tells me they love movies, and I'm like, well, what's the last movie you saw? And then in the theater, and then they're like, oh, I haven't gone to the theater. And I'm like, the theater, it's the experience. Seeing a movie in the theater, the big screen, the feel of the audience. Like, I mean, I'm like, sometimes it can be annoying, the audience, every once in a while.
Audiences are getting better, though, I think.
I mean, I will tell you to put your phone down. I will. Not shy. I've done it many times. But I'm like, I made this podcast because I love seeing movies in the theater, and I want to encourage people to see movies in the theater. So right now, like, no, we're not considering streaming only content. So in that end, now that we've predicted you've predicted and I've countered the demise of the small budget or the mid-budget film, would we give this the social impact score on the scale of 1 to 10?
Ooh. I guess I would say a 4.
Okay.
It obviously, with its box office returns, is not having a big impact right now, but as I said earlier, I think it's a part of the modern sci-fi renaissance. You can put it in the pile with Gravity, Ex Machina, etc. About just the overall quality of movie that sci-fi is representing right now. So in that aspect, it'll have a long-term impact, but that's about it, I think.
Yeah, I'm willing to give it as high as a 3 to say, like, the different business model. Let's see how that plays out. I'm curious to know. They're, it's trying something new. But yeah, I mean, if nobody sees it, it's hard to have it.
Right.
Okay, something you think people should see.
So there's a couple of movies that people should see. They're both ironic due to the conversation we had. They're both streaming right now. You can find them on all the streaming sites, Amazon, Vudu, etc. The first one is Blame. It's by Quinn Shepard. She's 23 now, but she wrote it in high school. And then she produced, directed, edited, and starred in it at 20 years old.
Wow.
And it's a great film about a girl in high school who had some mental issues, and she gets close to a theater teacher. The narrative structure borrows a lot from The Crucible. It's very good, and it's just impressive that such a young woman made the film. So you should give that a try, because I think you're going to be hearing about her in the future. And the other one is called Bex. It's another independent film, first-time directors Elizabeth Rohrbacher and Daniel Powell. And it's starring Lena White, I believe her name is, Tony Award winner, Grammy Award winner. She sings, acts, and it's very well done as well. A story that shows a complicated side of love from this young lesbian. It's a very good movie. You should watch that as well.
Cool. Yeah, I actually have a streaming recommendation. This is funny because it's sci-fi, so I thought it would be a good recommendation for this podcast. Like, I tried so hard not to like this. I was like, fine, I like sci-fi. I'll watch one episode and I'm going to hate it, and then I can just be done with it. And I was like a little bit intrigued after the first episode, so I watched the second episode, and like, sure enough, finish off the whole season of Altered Carbon. I really liked it. It's crazy violent. There's a ton of nudity. Just throwing that out there. You may, you decide whether that's for you or not. But the acting was really top-notch. The storyline was interesting. I just thought the sets were really fun. I just enjoyed it so much. And I was like, again, fighting myself, trying to be like, no, don't like this. And I just really did. So I'm sort of forced to recommend it, which is a weird position to be in.
Yeah, I've heard good things about Altered Carbon.
Alrighty. Well, we hope you enjoyed this episode of Movies That Matter. If you did, please take a second to leave a review on iTunes and recommend it to your friends. Check out our website, moviesthatmatterpodcast.com, for links to things we've discussed, and visit our store. If you want to talk to us, leave a comment on our Facebook page or on Twitter with our tag @MoviesMatterPod. Garrett also has
a website. It's called Cinema Babble. It's one word, the word cinema, and then Babel, Babel. You can catch me at cinemababble.com, on Facebook and Instagram, Cinemababble, and Twitter, The Cinemababble.
Our accounts are connected on Twitter if you forget any of this information, but I'm sure you've enjoyed Garrett on many episodes, so please check his stuff out. And remember, movies matter.
And so do you.
We'll see you next time.
Hi, I'm Nicole.
Sarah.
Hillary.
And we're the hosts of the Feminine Mistake podcast.
Each month we sit down with a guest to watch movies that are 20 years or older.
And see how they hold up to today's modern feminist lens.
Why do mermaids have such low self-esteem?
Why is it so funny when men take care of babies?
What exactly did Jenny die of in Love Story?
These are the kind of hard questions we ask ourselves on the Feminine Mistake podcast. The Feminine Mistake podcast, now available on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, and Podbean. Do you guys think that was okay?
Yeah, I don't know. We sounded kind of shrill.
Really?
Yeah, women's voices are just so grating on the radio.
Yeah.
Oh, man, you're right.
Yeah, I mean, have you ever heard those guys over at the Nerdist or Last Podcast on the Left? I mean, they're just biologically more funny than we are.
It's so true.
Yeah.